I'm going to get started since it's 10:30. So good morning, welcome. My name is Jason Sheeler, and I have the privilege and honor here to be and lead us through this what we call Microchurch On Mission here in the sanctuary at 10:30. I am a full-time pastor at Hope on the Beach Church, and this is a picture of our beach service at Easter taken with a drone. And so somebody has to suffer and work on the beach. It might as well be me. But it's a real privilege and honor to be here and share some of the story that we have gone through that maybe help encourage you, is my prayer, and equip you to be maybe rethinking your situation and the possibilities that can happen there. And I think yesterday we heard, I don't know if you got to be able to hear that message about God is good and we're not alone. And I really believe that God is good, and God has a plan for all of us, and He has placed us in a place to serve in that time. And really, you are to be kind of like the hero of that story. You are brought in that story for those challenges at that time to help lead people through. And as you do this, as you make movement, you're going to gain wisdom. And that wisdom is going to be part of your story that you can tell that God is weaving through you. And so I come here today really just to share our story, but realizing that my story is made up of lots of stories of people that I've watched who have poured into me. And so as I tell this story, I want you to realize it's just not my story. It's a lot of people's stories that have invested in me. And I love this quote, if you only live one life if you don't read. You only live one life if you don't read. If you read, you can live many lives. Between reading and God's Word, there has been a huge investment that has helped me to make this journey, and I pray that you will be encouraged to read, to get in people's story, and have more stories in you. I do say as you go into different stories, I have this quote that's been sticking in my head lately. I don't know if you heard this, but in the pursuit of truth, we risk being offended. If we're really going to pursue truth, we have to take the willingness to be offended. We have to be willing to be wrong so we can learn and we can grow. So let me tell you a little bit about my story and give you some context. And so the context is that I grew up in a very, very traditional church. It was a small church. It was a church where my father grew up at. And you would think that since it was a church where my father grew up at, that there would be relationships and there would be generations of stuff, and there was not. We sat right there, fourth pew on the left side, all the time. That was our seat. There was really nothing for us to get connected to or be part of there. I did confirmation. I went to confirmation on Saturday for 2 hours. 1 hour was studying and doing class. The other hour, we were the janitors. We went over and we cleaned the church and we polished the brass and we actually even made candles and we practiced alkylighting. My confirmation class was basically built on 4 tests. There were 100 questions. I aced every single one of them, to the surprise of my pastor and my parents. But they didn't realize when they gave me my brother's textbook to use, it had the test in them. So, God intervened in a way that He sent me to a junior and senior Lutheran high school. It's in that high school in religion classes, and really all my classes, I was blessed in a time to go to a high school where God was just on the move with these teachers, and these teachers integrated the faith, they lived the faith, and they shared it. And their life was radically different, in my view, as a kid, than anything I saw at home, than anything I saw at church. And that really started to stir in me. It gave me a clear kind of choice of what kind of life do I want to have. Because by 6th grade, I've already been hanging out with people older in my neighborhood. My neighborhood was like older kids. Everybody was 3-4 years older, and I was the younger guy. So by 6th grade, I've already been smoking, chewing, gotten high, drunk, robbed trains, etc. And also then in high school later, I dated a pastor's daughter who was a Pentecostal church. Don't judge. And we went to our church 8 o'clock, her church at 10 o'clock, and her church at 6 o'clock. But there was a major difference at that church. And things kind of happened. And life started to change. And there was life change going on at the high school in my life. And it was in 9th grade when I was coming out of a chapel that we had Tony Campolo there. And I can't tell you what he said, but I walked up the steps out of the gym going to class, and right outside the building, I felt like God just said, "You're going to go to ministry." And I'm like, "You're kidding me. I don't want to go." But I knew I was going to go. And so I started out in a DC ministry and went to Seward. And one of the reasons I was a DC is we didn't have DCs in my church. I didn't even know what it was, but I never thought I could be a pastor because I didn't have a role model of a pastor. I knew great teachers, so I thought maybe I should be a teacher. But being in a classroom all day scared me, so I wanted something different. But this is the question that burned in me as a kid. Why is my church not a place of life change? Why is it not? I was seeing life change at going to a Christian concert. I saw life change having a Bible study at my teacher's house. I had life change going fishing with my teacher because the conversations we had. But I'm sitting there going, when I go to church, the church that I grew up in, there was nothing. And that question bothered me and drove me. And then when I was in ministry, you hear these things, right? You hear these things that this is why we don't have life change. This is what we need to do. And so I kind of took some of these things and I imported them into my youth ministry and tried to do that while I tried to change in youth. And so I started seeing that. Like I was trying to put all these different little, I call these little shiny things, right? We were always saying, well, we'd have better life change in the church if it was greater preaching happening and more inspired preaching. And then, church needs to be more fun. If you had fun, especially youth ministry, you had more fun, then you could have more life change. And, it needs to have cool technology or drama, whatever it was at that time that you need to really hook their attention and engage them, or videos came in the scene. Well, your music just needs to be more contemporary. Well, if you just had a contemporary service, you'd have more life change. And so, or you need more energy, or the setting needs to change, right? And so we got into coffee bars and things, or it just needs to be bigger and better. And it seemed to be, that's the next what, it was always what's going on, what's the next thing we can do, and this is the next trend, and this is what's going to help people come to church. Have you heard those things, right? So what we do? We sell a lot of what? And so, I was in DC ministry, and then God called me into with Concordia Publishing House as a Christian education specialist. And so I traveled out Michigan, Ohio, and consulting and training. And so I was in basically 300 churches a year over in different denominations. And I just studied them and trained and consulted and did things. And the Lord just hit my heart because after seeing all these pastors, I saw pastors that were all so different. Lord said, "Hey, idiot, if I can use them, you think I could use you?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I see that now. If you're helping them, could you not lead a church?" I also married to a wife who never wanted to be a pastor's wife. She wouldn't even date somebody at Concordia if they were pre-seminary or even were sniffing it. She's like, "I'm not dating you." So she thinks I lied to her. But anyway, so what happened is, I was driving home from Ohio, and we're in Michigan, And I'm like, all right, I need to have the talk with her. And I pulled in the driveway, and she came walking out. And she says, I'm sorry, but I've been disobedient. We haven't been following God. You need to go to seminary.
Wow.
Yeah. That's one of my big beliefs. I learned from John Maxwell. God always talks to both of you with big decisions. And he prepares the heart because he's never going to conflict with your union. If he's conflicting with your union, you're probably not with God. And so we started to pursue that, and we decided to homeschool for a year, make the transition. Homeschool for a year, we're going to make the transition. The church that I was actually, she was working as a preschool teacher part-time, and I was consulting them to start a open arms ministry with a preschool and have a Gen X worship. That's what they wanted to do. And this is a church actually where I interned at, which is pretty funny that here I am back. I was helping them. And they had a conflict at the main campus, and they lost a DC and pastor. And so they asked me if I would come on for a year and just fill it in before I go to seminary. And I said, this would be great because I could preach, I could do other things, I could get back hands-on in the church, kind of get my feet grounded at a different level, then go to seminary, and I'll take that experience with me. So I did that. 6 months through, we got a DCE. We had the child care going, and then they asked me if I would go start the worship for a Gen X. We took 5 people over there to go start that worship service. 5 Gen X, young adult, high tech, high energy guys, and they were really smart and great people. I mean, it was just, they were a good group. But we chased this. And we did a 2-part service. We did a 30-minute seeker service with secular music, full band, lights, coffee bar, and we made our own videos every week. We did dramas that tied into the videos. A 15-minute break, and for coffee and just talking, and then people could leave if they wanted to. And then we did a 45-minute believer service that connected from that service to this service. It was a lot of programming. It was tons of work. And we did so well that the coffee bar had more money than the offerings. That's how well we did. But we were reaching to a Gen X group. And we were trying to reach this group. Well, the problem was that this Gen X group was also in an open arms childcare that was reaching a boomer group, kind of a 40-year-old group, because this was people that waited to have kids because they put career first kind of thing. And so then they had their kids later. They were both working, and they needed that to pay for the childcare because it was expensive. And so it was really a mixed match in the vision, in the direction. It was awkward. And we were doing it at night because I was still tied to the main campus because we had 5 services there to do. But I chased this thing. And we realized it was not working. It was doing some things, but it wasn't really life-changing. We simplified. We moved to Sunday morning, and then we kept that a little bit wrong, and we ended up killing it and simplifying it, and then went to Sunday morning too, and then we just exploded. But it wasn't the worship. So after 8 years of this, then the Lord put on our hearts that we need to start another church to step out of this. You know, we loved it. We stepped out. And as we stepped out, my wife calls it stepping into the belly of the whale, because we didn't know where we were going. Well, we didn't have another call. We actually brought another pastor on, helped train him, and then stepped out. And we just felt like God wanted us to start something else, and we didn't know what yet. And we kind of wandered for a year. And we had opportunities all over the place, but nothing ever to call us. And we wanted to remove ourselves from that place so that other pastor could do well. And we ended up in another town at a community church. And one of the reasons is because my daughter was in musicals, at the high school, and they were doing musicals at the church, and so she wanted to be part of that. And this guy was a missionary who came and planted a church with the blessing of another church, and he just had a heart for missions and to plant. Anyway, he found out we were there. He sought me out, and he said this. He goes, I heard you're gone. And I was like, well, how you hear about this? He goes, because your church is in the fabric of that city, and the city told me because they miss you. And that was another reminder to me about what are we about? What is our focus? What's our purpose? What's driving us to do what we do? And it rose this question, like, how much programming money do we have to do in worship for people to come to church? And I realized that my question had changed. Instead of being more focused on changing lives, we get more focused on people to come. I hear it all the time with COVID. Well, how do we get people to come? How do we get people to come? How do we get people in a seat? That's always the question. That, to me, is the wrong question. That puts you on a wrong path. It's never about people coming. It's about blessing people, connecting with Jesus and changing lives. If we always are worried about if they come, then we always have an agenda. And they smell it. You want us there because you want our money. Or you need us to do something for you. When I realized in my first church plant, my immaturity, my church became my idol. A lot of my value, my worth, my identity was tied into that church. And I needed those people to do that. I mean, wasn't always there, but I had a need for people to be there. I had a need for it to be successful. And because I still had some of my needs in me, it was getting away of the life change that could happen. We still had some major life change. I mean, we went from a city that was suing us because we didn't have worship there, we just had a child care and they wanted tax money on the property, to a city that missed us when we weren't there because whenever they did something, they asked us to be there. Can I ask somebody to get, yeah, thank you. I love the background music, but it's just not fitting my vibe right now. So I'm not saying worship's not important. Please don't hear that. Worship's incredibly important to the church. It is the heart of the church. But I think we got to really keep our motives in check. We got to keep our ambitions in check. We got to keep our hearts in check and our minds of what are we really trying to build here and what is really successful. And the way I started to rediscover this and kind of go back is I just went back to the early church. And I asked the question simply of the early church is saying, what was the strength or the attraction of the early church, and how does that line up to the modern church? Because we can look out through all history of the Bible, right? We can watch the church from Old Testament, New Testament. Man, they're right there with God, and then they drift away. And then they come, God restores them back with God, and then they drift away again, and they shrink, and they go larger, and they're doing this the whole time. It's never this perfect up to the right thing. God is disciplining and shaping it. But what really was attractional? When was the church this real light in the community that people were drawn to, that were gravitated to it, could not deny it, where there was life change? And so that question has really informed me of how I do ministry, of how we look at things that are successful or not, or valuable or not. And some of the shifts that came out of this for me are this, is that, and I think these are important from the missional church, no matter where you are, is that the church is the only organization that exists for others. We exist for others. And yet we staff it, we program it mostly for ourselves. If you would list all the ministries of your church and ask who are they for, I bet you most of them are people that are there. We do very little for the people outside, and we do very little for the people. Also the other end we suffer on is very little for leadership. So the two biggest ends in my view, we miss. And so the shift that really led to that thought is that first one is as we were wandering around trying to figure out what we were doing, and we were in California and South Florida, different places, studying and saying, does God want us here to start a church? Fortunately, I had my parent-in-laws go to a large church where that pastor is a church planner who Rick Warren saved from his destruction because he was lost, and he begged Rick Warren to help him, and he did. And now he is a trainer of church planners. And he just offered a weekend called Barnabas where he just brought guys into a church planning who were just floundering. He had 150 applicants, and we got to go. And all it was basically just sitting and listening and talking. But what we learned out of that is these things. We learned that God calls you through the church to a city, but not to a church. We need to have a greater love for the city than the church. Well, the greater love for the lost in the city. Scripture, right? And what in the Bible? It's the church of Ephesus, the church of Philippi. It's the church of that city. Now, I'm not going to argue about names, but I'm going to argue about the direction that places us in. If you go to a church because you have a call to that church, then you end up being locked into that church and not the community. Your focus is inward to that church. My call is not for the church's survival or growth. It's for the mission to that city by which the church will most likely grow. It might not. What do you want to be the legacy? Oh, you grew and led a large church, or you loved a city. I think you can have both, but I'm going to say there's a difference between which is your motivation. Where's your heart? My heart has always been now for the love of the city. And that's one of the things, and he said, if you love where you go, you want to plant someplace that you want to buy a gravesite at, that you want to die at. And so that became the defining thing about where we're going to plant. Now, our story, how we got there is I think I got time to tell you briefly. So, it's almost a year. Our kids are starting school again. I have a 12th grader, 9th grader, and 6th grader at that time. And we came back from that time with this kind of God for the city. And my wife says, we both love the beach. We both love warmer weather. We've been praying for 4 seasons. We said, I grew up in a city. We've been in the suburbs. I'm tired of suburbs. I can't live in the city. I like to visit. Don't want to live there. But if you put me in a country farm, I'm going to die. So, God, I don't know what that means. Her family were farmers in Missouri, and so I would go on the farm. Loved it for a couple days, but man, after a while, I'm like, and so, so I didn't know what that. I don't know what delight in the Lord, and He'll give you the desires of your heart, right? And so we just delighted in the Lord. And that was our focus. And my wife woke up and she said, I had a dream. We started worship on the beach. I said, that's a great dream, honey. We live We live in Michigan. A lot of people have that dream. I was like, so I said, that's great. And then I went to work as we were in this. One of my members that I currently started a business together. He had 2 other businesses. And the other thing I want you to do is be my corporate chaplain. And I want you to witness to the guys at my business because I have a bunch of young adults who are lost. And so I did that. And I had a guy who hated me, literally would throw stuff, yell stuff, do stuff. And by the end of my time, he was making me lunch, and we were having lunch together. But it was awesome. And then we did community stuff. And what I didn't realize during that time with him, I was actually doing a missional church, micro. Because I did that there, we did it in the neighborhood, and then we started meeting in his clubhouse in his neighborhood. And we had 25 people. And like, are you starting a church? I said, nope. We're just going to connect people to Jesus. They aren't connected to Jesus. I'm waiting to get a call to church, but in reality, we were starting a church without knowing it. And so anyway, I go to work, and then the next day I get a phone call from this church in Florida, and they call and say, hey, are you open for a call? And I said, yeah, but it's getting late. School's coming. I don't know how, but yeah, I'm open for a call. They said, wonderful. Well, we want to interview tomorrow. Is that okay? That'd be great. They said, one thing before we interview, we want you to know, so if you can be open for the interview or not. I said, what's that? And they go, we have a beach service. Are you okay with that? I said, nothing. I said, sure, I'm okay with that. So I called my wife and told her, and she's like, that's ridiculous. So, it was awesome. So then we prayed. I called the next day. I've had a ton of these interview calls, and it was just a fun interview. And I said, this is really interesting. Like, this group is very interesting. I don't know, it's got my heart. And so we interviewed, and at the end of the interview, they were like, I just said, look, how serious are you guys? Because I got school start and everything else. I really need to know you are serious, or we're looking after school year. And they go, we're serious. I said, we think you should come down this weekend. So this was Wednesday. So I called my wife and said, we flew down Thursday. They flew us to Pensacola, which is farther away, and as we were driving across, my wife and I are pinching ourselves. We never saw this place. We were just falling in love with the place right away. They were meeting in another church, and we went to that other church, and that other church was right across the street from a graveyard. We said, that's where we die. So our hearts were committed. They didn't know that, but they were. And so the other thing I learned, I'll come back to that story, is that relationships trump everything, the importance of relationships. People gravitate to real relationships. That was part of the early church. They loved each other, right? They shared things. They had incredible love. A love that was so selfless that it contrasted to the world. It was so prosperous and selfish, kind of like our world today. That gave themselves and shared and brought people into their lives. And it was natural. It wasn't a program. It wasn't like, hey, this is my job to do it now. This is what we do. But add that other kind of love that is like a forgiveness and grace and this fellowship and unity. And there was this faith in action, right? People were doing things. It wasn't about a religion. It was about following Jesus. And I think the thing that really drove me is I think the number 3 is just a deep belief in God and self, which enables a willingness to risk failure or lose people. The church was not going to compromise to people. There was a deep belief. They were willing to risk stuff, risk their lives. When we stepped out of that church, we took a huge risk. We had a mortgage, we had bills, we got 3 kids. I didn't know where our income was going to come. We had kids very young. We weren't supposed to have kids, and we had kids. And so, I was on an internship with our first kid, and I was making $12,000 a year. And so I was like, there wasn't much there. I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to get my kids to college. I don't know how it's going to happen, but it's a risk. And we stepped out. We saw God keep providing to the point where my mother-in-law came to see us because she was scared that we weren't eating. And she came up to see us. And she was going to make a pot roast meal. She had it all laid out. She was going to go to the grocery store. We were going to go to work. We left her car, and it snowed. She's from Central Florida. She doesn't drive in snow, and that's a good thing. So she stayed home. Guess what landed on our doorstep that night? The exact menu she was planning. God is good. And we saw that. And we believe that we could take risks and steps and that God will care for us no matter what. You need that belief. The church needs that. The church is always fighting in the back of its mind for survival. We got to get out of that. It holds us hostage. And so I came to this group, and this is our group, if you can see. This is the church they were meeting in. It was not their church. And we had like 12 people. This is actually a little bit higher because there's snowbirds. I came with no plan, no budget, with a group ready to quit because they couldn't do anything. I asked, how much money do you bring in a year? We don't know. What do you spend things on? We don't know. We never have a need. I go, what do you do? Oh, we have fellowship, Somebody brings some food in. They had no cost except for somebody to come preach. So we had about 125 in the bank, and I figured that we had about a year and a half, we could probably make it. So I made a budget on a napkin. They voted that Sunday, even though they didn't have a voters meeting properly, but they voted that Sunday to extend the call. We prayed about it on Monday with my kids. We all agreed. I met with them Monday night, and I said, here's 10 things. If I come here, you need to commit to these 10 things. And they said yes, because they were desperate. They really didn't mean it. That was the resistance later. We flew home on Tuesday, in 24 hours, packed up, loaded the cars, drove back down because school started on Friday. Well, open house Friday, school start Monday. All our kids moved. They were calling their friends. Hey, we're leaving. They're like, no, you're not. So they took pictures of the different state signs as we were driving. We made a very quick move. So they were doing worship with the CDs, very poorly. They didn't even understand it because there was only 3 of them that were Lutheran. The rest of them were not Lutheran. They did not relate to the music and to the liturgy and stuff, but this is what they did. And so, but I came in with some different shifts that I learned that I think were crucial for us moving. And the first shift is that, not a custodian of the congregation, but lead missionary. If a congregation is going to get on mission, the pastor has to be the lead of the mission. You cannot sub that out. You cannot delegate that. I've seen it all the time. The temperature of the pastor is the temperature of the congregation. If the pastor is passionate about it, so will the congregation be. It's got to be in your DNA. It's got to be part of your story. It's got to be you connected to when you were lost. Even if you were like me, raised in a church, I was lost, but I was in the church. And that's the one thing that breaks my heart, and that's one thing that shapes me in our church, is that it's in my DNA because I know what it's like to be in a church but not belong in a church. The other thing is that you got to carry the public office into the community. You have to model it. You got to be out there. I mean, again, when we transition that city between wanting to sue us to wanting to embrace us and miss us, is because we were involved in everything they had. we formed a partnership with it. I started to coach there. I met the mayor's wife through the coaching rec league. She was in charge of recreation. And then I met the events person. Whenever we did historical events and stuff, we put all our people in it. When they did a movie night in the park, we put all our people to clean up and serve. And so we were just there. And then I met the mayor. And so we just built a relationship and got out there. You know, today we live in a different environment, so we have commissioners in our area, so I know the commissioners. The commissioners protect us. We had a Satan group that was trying to get us off the beach, an atheist group that was trying to take us off the beach and try to use the law to do that, and they were right, because we were not doing permits. And you had to have a permit to be on the beach, but for us to get a permit to be on the beach would be $500 a weekend, which would have killed us. So the commissioners and the lawyers came to our rescue because of the stuff we've done in the relationships we have in the community. We're out there with them. So when I started, I was in Kiwanis, I was in Rotary, I was Chamber, other volunteer organizations. We just latched on to anything because we didn't have any money. So where we could latch on and help and do. And the last one is teach. Teach it over and over and over again. Vision leaks, mission leaks. And you have to keep teaching. You got to see opportunities to do that. One of the very great moments in our first church plant, that was the one thing that kind of helped break the barrier between, like I said, we had two different groups. In our parking lot, we had a basketball hoops, and we had a young properties guy, and he was really a sweet guy, and just raised up on the church, and just a good guy. And he came in, he's like, we got to stop these basketball hoops. I mean, we got needles, we got bottles, we got all this stuff over there, and there's trash in the basketball hoops and laying around. You know, this is not good. We have a child care, you really can't do that. And so I went to the trash can in our child care in the lobby. So I took that and opened it up, and it's Starbucks cups. And so then I just put them out there, and I did it to him, and I went to the whole church, and I just said, who are we here for? Who are we here for? Which? The ones with Starbucks cups, the ones that have the needles and the drugs. What are we going to be about? People? Or people that are hurting? And so we learned to play basketball. We took water bottles over there. We built relationships. And it changed. I didn't have to yell at them, didn't have to go kick them out. Just loved them. And they respected things. And they started to come to Jesus. We got to shift. It's not a threat. It's an opportunity. We got shifted. We got kicked out of the church because that church merged with two other churches, and so they kicked us out. And we were considered trash to them because they were an upper crust group that just does religion. They just like to show up. And so we got kicked out. We went to the junkiest restaurant there is in our town. The ceilings leaked with rats, and it was a buffet place. And it wasn't there much longer after we were there. But we would just cover things up, and we had church in there as well as on the beach. We moved in here to the Mexican market. And right by the Mexican market, this place, I mean, it's the only place we could afford. There wasn't many buildings, but this is the cheapest place around, I'm telling you. This place was a dump. It was a machine shop. There was tile all in workbenches and pegboard, and before it was that, it was a candy shop. And I'm literally walking through there with the manager, and the dog that he has with him just starts peeing on the floor. And I'm going, well, it doesn't matter. It's terrible. So we signed a lease with him. That's all we had. The next place that was even close was another $1,000 more, and we couldn't touch it. We pressure washed it, tore down the walls. It was a really rough textured, so we got 5 gallons of mud and textured it and painted it, put carpet in it. There was a dividing wall we knocked out and put a slider in. So that was to offices and to the classroom, one classroom we had. And there's an office and a half. So you literally just walked in, you were there. So that whole remodeling cost $5,000. Upon which our little congregation was flipping out. Pastor's going to spend all the money. Oh, he's terrible. I mean, it was terrible. But what we did, so I had a meeting with them, and I said, hey, let me tell you something. If this doesn't work and we fail, you guys can still meet. I have to go get another job. I think we're okay, all right? And we had a beach service, and I had about 25, 30 at that point. And in that time, there's a guy who came from Alabama. I don't know who he called me a couple weeks ago, and he said, what do you need? I heard you're just starting. I heard your sermon and stuff, and you want to really build a church for the city. And he says, what do you need? I said, well, I need a sound system. He goes, well, I'm not made out of money. I was like, I'm thinking $250, buddy. I don't know what you're thinking. It's a small room. And anyway, he sent the check. $5,000. God is good. When you're on mission, God hits something that's moving. I tell him it's his will, it's his bill. His will, his bill. So we took the risk and moved, and we learned from that. This is also the time where the next... I still had some of that wanting what I had before for a church and thinking a church had to be a certain way in my head. It wasn't totally out of me yet. And I was sitting in my office saying, man, Lord, we have old people. How are we going to build? What are we going to do? What are you really trying to build here? I love contemporary music more, and we're not even near any of that stuff. And so I was trying to and God just hit me on the head, really. And this is what he put in my heart. Build the church I put in your heart, not the one in your head. Surrender the one in your head and build the one I start putting in your heart. That was a huge shift. That led me just surrender all those other stuff. And again, I redefine the church then to this. And I'm telling you a lot of the whys, not the hows, because you need the why before you do the how, the what and the how. And I really think redefine success, and it's very simple to me. It's about the Great Commission. A church on the Great Commission, on the go, seeking the lost, keeping the lost on their radar, on their forefront as a priority. It's not our building, our programs, our budgets, how big our staff is. None of that really matters. It matters of how much you are on mission. And having a heart for mission, that what Jesus says, I come not to condemn, but to save, right? That needs to be in our hearts as a church. Why? The church is known to be. I mean, we made a video. I don't know how many remember Scooby-Doo, right? Remember Haunted Mansions, right? And then they got the museum that are moving and everything. The way it feels like when people come to church, they feel like all the eyes shifted to them. And so we want to just rid that, and we want to be on this mission. And the other thing that to success is great love. If you want to have a great church, it's the great commandment. Love one another as I loved you. Jesus in the Lord's Supper gives this command, the great command, to go and love others. It just kills me in our church that we still do relationships like the world does. It's just this exchange. If it's good for me, then I'll stay here. But if it gets rough, it gets tough, I'm out of here. Or if I get offended or I get hurt, I don't know how to, I'm not going to tell you that. I'm not going to follow Matthew. I'm not going to follow the Bible. I'm not going to reconcile. And so we see this huge trend in our area and in the cities next to us. There's just people that just move from church to church to whenever it's feeling good and doing good. They go to that church. When something happens, they run to another church or they just run away. And so I think we need to get back to being such a loving community that's so different than the world. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter what style. Because people don't care about style. They don't even really care about doctrine if you watch people. They care about love. Are we that affectionate with our love? And to me, this is the beauty of a microchurch, because it should be just so obvious. You can't miss it. And the great compassion. So it's great commission, great commandment, and great compassion. The story of the Good Samaritan, right? If you had time, I would break it down with you, but go read that story. I mean, there's crossing racism lines, racial lines. There's entering in somebody's mess that's dirty, it's painful, it's awkward. There's taking on the expense, giving up your time, your money, your investments, bringing others into the journey to help somebody get restored. That should be a picture of the church. That our hearts are filled with compassion, that we can't just look in our community and say, oh, that's bad, or that's wrong, or this is happening, and people get mad at it, but we don't move into faith and action and love. I want a community where our hearts are tender and the Spirit plucks us and we just move and things happen. You don't have to have the pastor tell you. You don't have to have a program for it. It doesn't have to be the night for it. And so my new definition is this last one. I think the church is not defined by Sunday morning, by what happens when it leaves the building. The greatest churches are the churches that are faith in action. They're Jesus with skins on the other 6 days of the week, not on Sunday morning. Because I can do a lot of things that put a lot of people in the pews. I can do things that can help manipulate to get more money. But I'm going to tell you, I can't affect a life. Only Jesus does that. And He does that best in community. Right? You know this as a pastor, as somebody who works, you need character, right? You need character to follow through and do things and to be a trustworthy person. You need competencies, you need skills. But the other thing you really need is connections. Connections give life to the dream. Character gives strength to work through it. Competencies gives you the ability to do it. But if you don't have connections and you're alone, it's easy to be discouraged, it's easy to be defeated, it's easy to become the victim, it's easy to quit. You also get a very narrow view of what could be. We need the connections so we can live fearlessly and take risk and fail and be okay and be loved. We failed a lot. We did. Our motto of our church is everyone's a missionary. You come to our church, our goal is to make you a missionary. We're very clear about it. You're going to be on mission to be with us. And if you want the temple, then we'll send you to another church. Because we have people who just want the temple. And so a lot of our time is spent is taking church out of people. And I tell people, look, the church was wrong. We told you, and it gave you wrong expectations. So we get back on mission. I'm going to get back to here. So our simple thing is like, somebody asked me last week, what's your definition of discipleship? It's just follow Jesus. We're obedient to Jesus. We follow His word. We want Jesus on the throne of our heart, Him leading our lives, Him being the one calling the shots in every part of our life. We want to just keep following Him. You know, most of the world, even Christians, they might do a devotion and put their eyes on Jesus, and then they shut the book and they put their eyes back into the world. I want people that have their eyes on Jesus and are glancing at the world, not at the Word. and looking at that worldview. And so my favorite scriptures to me is Jesus just said, come follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men. It's not this go do. I mean, we translate in America like fishers of men is like you're going to go do something, but if you dig deeper, it's about being. This is the challenge. It has to be in the being that leads to the doing, not always the doing to lead to the being, and that's our challenge. I think too much of this is something we go do. It's not part of our being. And I tell them they're always qualified. You remember Acts 4:13, the members of the council were amazed when they saw the boldness of Peter and John. They could see that they were ordinary, with no special training in scriptures. They also recognized them as men who had been what? With Jesus. We got to get people with Jesus. That's the qualification. When they're following Jesus, He will qualify them. He will equip them. We have a way overeducated church. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But significant shifts in the church. We started saying that church exists for those outside the walls, and we have to go to them. We have to go to them. We cannot wait for them to come to us. We need to take initiative, go to them. We said we want a decentralized ministry, and that creates a lack of control, and that creates fear for some people. That makes them uneasy, but that is how the mission is going to happen. It's not going to come from the office. It's got to come from you and decentralize it. And a significant shift, we look for community partnerships. So we did an event, and we did an event, and we were doing a cookout thing, and so we borrowed a grill from the bank. We got this from this group. I mean, we found partnerships to help us do things in the community. We found groups. I found people in other churches that would come help us to do outreach of different denominations. And so you got to be out there and having like your vision out there, and you'll just meet people. God will bring people into your life. God will start to bring resources to you. We did like I said, we tried to do a barbecue cookout. We did it on our own campus when we first started, and we tried to do this barbecue, give away barbecue and meet people and do stuff, and we had 5 people show up. It was supposed to be a smoke fest, and it was not. We tried to do an Easter thing, egg hunt, and we had 10. Our biggest event on our campus was our garage sale. Seriously, that was our biggest event. Everything failed on campus. And so we moved everything off campus. And that's when it started to really grow. So we moved off campus. I think off campus takes the pressure off. There's no agenda, and that you're there purely just to bless. We have done, one of the simplest things we do, we started was on Halloween, there's a neighborhood that blows up with a bunch of people. We went there and we gave out hot dogs. Because people, are taking their kids out of school real quick or wherever they are, and then they're doing all this candy stuff, and they don't have real food. And so we said, hey, we'll give hot dogs out. So first of all, they were really surprised the church was there at a Halloween event. And then secondly, they were so grateful for hot dogs and water. And all we did is build relationships and just hand out hot dogs. We do a lot of hot dogs. There's actually a story of an RV company that made their success by having hot dogs. Hot dogs doesn't really relate to the church. There might be a better food, but hot dogs is like campfiring, so that helps them connect. But we just keep sowing seed. We started. Wait, where am I at? All right, I'll just go on next one. The other change was greater ministry of walls, discover. Greater ministry outside your walls and in, and then discover your niche and rhythm. This is huge. You can't do everything. I mean, we could do a lot of things and partner with stuff, but as we were doing get out of community, we start saying, what is our real niche? What are the things that we can really help in this community, even being small? So we could focus on, not do everything. And so we started to focus and stuff. It's your rhythm. And your rhythm is, when is the season going on? What's going on in people's lives? How many times I call it, can you make your congregation flex? And like they're doing heavy mission stuff. And then when can they relax and you give them rest? And so we looked at this rhythm and we start looking at niches in our community where we could help and do things. And instead of thinking like, hey, if we do this one thing, it works everywhere, we looked at our community and looked at it as waffles and say, hey, there's a little pocket here, there's a pocket here, and a pocket there. How can I pour love into this pocket that's empty? So look for the pockets that are empty. Don't try to be the big thing. Look for the small pockets. And as you look for small pockets, though, you'll find that you'll get niches, and niches will grow. And people will come alongside. And so a great example of this is we were doing the celebration, the 500-year anniversary for the Reformation, right? That was big. That was everywhere. And we're like, hey, we're Germans. Let's do German Fest. And so we're going to take our worship, our late-hour worship, we're going to take it to a park. And we're going to do it at the park, and then we're going to do brats and sauerkraut and German potato salad, and we're going to serve German food. We're going to have a booth of the Reformation, and we're going to have games there for kids and just things for families to do and crafts and stuff like that. So we ended up partnering with this resort area to use their green space. They loved the idea because it brought people to their space, so then they gave us money for it. And this is what happens in our area. People want to draw people near their shops, near their area. So when you do something, they come around it. There was a restaurant that was far away that loved the idea, and so they chimed in. They say, we'll do a beer tent for you. So we ended up doing a worship service and then followed by a German Fest. And so our little church that was probably worshiping 60 had 250. And then we had about 400 show up for the German Fest. And so that was so great. We'll do it next year. Well, next year, it went up to 500-600. Like, man, this we can do it next year. Next year, we started planning it, and guess what? There were so many German Fests that were going on through the whole month of October. We're like, we can't even touch this. It's over. But that partnership led us to another event that we called Christmas at the Beach. And at Christmas at the Beach, we brought in choirs from the public schools, the bands from the public schools. We got vendors. We did food. We did crafts. We did blow-ups. We did our own choir of 4 people and our worship leader. And we brought Santa Claus in, and we got him to come in on a sleigh for free. We had train rides. We got all that stuff, a lot of it donated, to just bless the community, bring families together, and share Jesus with. And so we did that the Saturday after Thanksgiving, the first week of December. And our first year, we had over 500, and then it went to 1,000. And it cost us very little. So you keep moving on. You keep trying. Just so you know, our church membership, our church membership's around 100. We worship 250. So, and we were doing this with, you got to take off the people that can't really move, and so you're doing it with less than 50 people. So it's possible. Here's something you got to remember. People will try to hijack the mission. This is a constant battle. There is a constant gravitational pull to self over mission. It is always there. And you will face it, you will feel it, you will fight it. You're going to have to always go after it and pursue it and push it. You got to remember, I learned this the hard way. Your dream is somebody else's nightmare. You're all excited about it, it's their nightmare. You know, a great way I maybe illustrate to help it is our friends, their neighbor sold, and they had a new neighbor come in, and a new neighbor started changing things and had different patterns and different times. And I'm like, they're living their dream, and you're miserable because it was affecting their life. And I'm going, it's your dream is going to be somebody else's nightmare. Nobody's going to like it. And you got to just know that. And you got to be okay with that. And you got to be okay saying, well, this might not be the place for you. We had tons of people that were just, that adhere to the liturgy and not to following Jesus. And Paul says that, right? Many people have the form of religion, but not the power of it. And we do liturgy, but we just don't do it formally. And so you let them go. You put them in places where they can be fed if they can't come along. But you got to be able to be willing to take that risk. We first started, and I told you those 10 things. I said, I'm doing these 10 things. We got to do them. And I told them, look, you don't have time to play. We have no idea what the money is, and so we got to move fast. We got to relaunch this, rebrand it. You are so disconnected from your community. Your community thinks you're just a little club of old people. We got to change the narrative in this community. And they didn't know it because they loved each other. They felt good. They were, it was this little holy huddle. And I always say, I don't know, anybody watch Lion King? You know Lion King? You know when all the vultures are all together and Pumbaa likes to run in there? That's what I feel like my ministry was. Let's just run through that huddle and blow it up so we can get going. So our biggest giver, left after 3 months. And I just said, I told you we were going to do these things. And he was more attached to the logo than following Jesus. And so you're going to have resistance. People will inside and outside will attack you. They'll push against you. And I just tell you, ignore the noise. When anything is moving, science tells us there is friction. So when you get moving, expect friction, especially in the beginning, because you're easier, more vulnerable in the very beginning. It's really hard when you're small to get moving. And if those people are in multi-sites, and so if you do another site and it's different, and your sites are too close, there's this gravitational pull. I can go back to mama. People always want to go back to Egypt because it's comfortable. And so you're going to lead them out of Egypt. Doug Fields, I don't know if you remember Doug Fields, youth ministry, and that's one of the things he taught me. He was doing a youth event. He had a big concert, they used to call it fifth quarter football thing at his church. And they had his band and everything, and they were going to do he's going to speak, and the band's going to play, and all these kids are there. And then he was standing there like on a hill looking at the event, and he looked, and he saw all his volunteers on the outside of all the kids. And he said, I need to get in that. I need to go and get in that crowd and get my volunteers in there. You're going to have to constantly keep doing it. People are going to resist. They're going to pull back. They're going to say, this is too much. You got a druggie. You got a homeless person in your church. We had druggies in there. We had CEOs. You got to be willing to get into the mess. Let the mess come in your house. Come in your life. Walk with them. And so people are going to be resistant to that. I think the other challenge that we got to watch that hijacks the mission, we have a victim mentality. I just did a webinar for our district, and when I did the webinar for our district on just doing something of Google Pages, if you haven't done that, it's actually a very effective tool. And I was talking about Google Pages, and we had on the chat, well, we're a small church. We're a small church. We're a small church. I don't care. The small church is like the words of death. We're a small church, and it's great. It's awesome. I love being a small church. You know what? You're going to have to make some choices. You're going to make some priorities. You can't do it all. You're going to have to make some sacrifices. You're going to have to maybe sit there and say, hey, if I really believe that this is going to make a difference, then I got to find a way to fund it. I might have to fund it outside of me. I might have to go fund it and talk to people in my church and say, hey, can somebody give extra money so we can do this because we don't have that in our budget? If you believe it's going to make a difference, then that's what you do. You don't sit there and say, well, we're a small church, quit, we're done. Well, then shut the doors. Why not? Quit now. You're an awful witness. You gotta be okay. It's okay to be a small church. I think that's one of the things I'm talking about. Like, the world is just got big churches as that is the ideal. Do you realize it's only about 10% of the world has big churches? Only like 10% of pastors will minister in a large church? Perhaps it's God's plan that there will be more small churches in every nook and cranny of this world because there's so many people of varieties and have different needs, and they need a small community where they can step into and connect to Jesus simply. There is so many strengths to a small church that we forget that are there that we can leverage and we can use. Big churches have to constantly get smaller and have to constantly put program and ministry so you feel that closeness. You have that naturally. Love is what people really need. Do what you can do, yes, with excellence. We all knew it. Yes, because people do it fancy. Yeah, so what? But you do your story, with the best you can. That communicates. So we got to get out of the victim mentality. It's killing us. Because when you say you're a small church, you also are saying we are just surviving. No. We're not a small church. We are a small church on purpose. Oh. We got to get out of the victim mentality of saying the world's not interested. That's not true. The world is very interested in Jesus. They're talking about it, they're thinking about it, but they need people to guide them through it. There's lots of things on the internet, yes, but there's not somebody who can love and touch them and walk them through it. Head to heart. You need people. People are hungry. Jesus will bring them to us. Yes, he does at times, but he's called us to go too. And the other one says, we tried that, right? We've done that before. I think one of the victim mentalities too, resistance you get, I didn't put up there, is that people are living in their past, not in their present. I remember the church when. I hear it today. I remember the church before COVID. Well, we were so full and everything. I'm like, hey, you have everything you need in Jesus right now. Stop looking back. Look forward. You have everything you need. You have the Word. Dude, we did door-to-door prayer time. We just did hand and feet combat. I got a coffee in the same Starbucks every single day. Sat there and meet people. Doesn't take money. It takes time. You have to trust God will provide all you need and build His church. Peter said, "What? This is my thing. That a microchurch does not come out of program. It comes out of your relationship with God when it's on mission." Peter said this, right, to the guy. We must obey God rather than man. You got to get that in our hearts. We got to get out of man's way. We got to get out of the what man has taught us, what man is trying to force on us. And you got to say, what does God say? What does God's word say? What am I going to be obedient to what God's called me to do? James 1:2-4, dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. COVID, being small, having challenges. Put it this way, if you don't know this, you grow to a new level, there's a new devil. I don't know if you heard that. You don't stop having challenges. You just get different challenges. And they get sometimes a lot harder and more complex. And so being small, you can learn those challenges and you can master those a lot quicker and easier and be a lot more moving being smaller and be organic than programmatic. And so when you have challenges, consider and enjoy, because those are growth opportunities. Those are ways to grow. Look at those challenges. They're good there to be there. And you don't have to fix every challenge. If I'm in the center of this room and I'm surrounded by chairs and there's a fire, do I move every chair to get out of here for a fire? No, I pick chairs that are right here to get out those doors. Same thing with your church. If your church has several problems, just list them all out. But you got to know where you're going and say, okay, which one is my critical path that's going to get me out of here? And when I move those chairs out, guess what happens? Those problems stay behind. They don't stay with me. We got to make the problems smaller, and we just got to pick the ones we really need to focus on and execute those. So for some of you, I talked to some. The first problem I have to deal with in our church was, are you really going to be a loving community? Are you really going to be on mission? Are you really going to care for this city? Once we got that focus to the outside, these inside problems that were all there falling apart, fall down. You got to lay that foundation. That's why I'm saying this and not getting other stuff. You got to have that foundation. It's a consider of joy. Know that your faith is tested. Your endurance has a chance to grow. Problems are growth times. So let it grow, and when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect, complete, needing nothing. When we go through that growth, we get out of ourselves, and then we get into others, and we realize that it's something bigger and greater going on. Matthew 20 says, when even the Son of Man came not to serve, but to serve others and give his life as a ransom for money. It's just a reminder, look, if they did these things to Jesus, if Jesus had a hard time, why wouldn't we not have a hard time? So expect it. Embrace it. That's leading. That's serving. It's going to happen. So we started to change things. One of the big things is having a pastor-led Bible study. They had a pastor who helped them out and did Bible study. He would ring the bell, start the study, and ring the bell and end it. And then they just left. It was a weird experience. But I killed that Bible study because of this thing here. I think life groups and we have life groups. We went from just a Bible study led by a pastor to life groups. And even when there was just 20 people, we did life groups. I wouldn't teach class. And this is why. And why we made a shift. Because if your learning leads to knowledge, you become a fool. So let your learning lead to action, and you have life change. We want to emphasize action, not just information. And so Sunday morning we do now, as we are transitioning, our Sunday mornings is a lecture. I preach for about 40 minutes, at least. And then we have life group is the lab. Life group is a time where they get around the message and get into more application. And then life groups focus on care, life application, and mission. And so even when we were smaller, we broke up into groups and we started to move and get people into missions. And so part of our life group, if you want the Greg Finke, we use Finke's questions in our life groups. They are great. How did you see God at work in your life this week? That is an incredible question, because if they don't see God in their life, then they're not going to trust God to work in them to help somebody else. You have to help your people to see God, not just know God. What is God teaching you? How much are you in the Word? That's our source of power and strength. That's what's going to prepare us to have a word to share to somebody. What conversations are, they got to learn to be self-feeders. They can't just be dependent feeders. And so our big thing is you got to be learning to feed yourself. You're on a mission. What conversations you're having pre-Christians? Are you connecting with them? You're having conversations? No, it's conversations. It's not conversions. It's just conversations. And what good can we do around here? What does God lead us to good to do a mission? And how can we help in prayer? And so our life groups now are bigger, and then they break down into smaller groups, like 3 or 4, and they go through these questions. And they seek and they adopt a mission. And so our mission is getting more and more decentralized. Again, I just say we really just seek ways to hug your community. How do you put your arms around your community? How do you know that your presence is there, embrace? I mean, think how good a hug is. And see if your church is doing that. And so one of the ways we hugged our community is we have lifeguards, and we look for those who are just not noticed in our world, who serve and not get any recognition. These lifeguards come in, and they go through some pretty brutal training, which, by the way, the ladies love this because we have church on the beach, and they do their training right behind us with no shirts on. So yeah, exactly. We got them back, though. We started a Sunday night beach service for spring break in this one resort that asked us to come. So people have been drinking all day. There's a bar right next to us, and so my son was preaching, and I was doing the video, and right behind him is this whole row of women in G-string thong bikini things, barely anything, going to the bar right behind him. It was a row of like 15 people. I'm like, oh. So anyway, I go, you didn't think that was funny? Okay, fine. I thought it was hilarious. He actually had a drunk come out of the bar. He was drunk, and he came out the bar while he was preaching and stopped him and talked to him in his ear on his sermon. And he said, hey, you're doing good, but let's get a little bit more in the Word. And then he walked away, and he literally disappeared. Really weird, I'm telling you. We didn't go in the crowd, just like disappeared. So we did lifeguard recognition. We invite them to the service. We pray over them, and we gave them a gift certificate. And we partnered with the restaurant to give them a little coffee gift certificate that's across the street, because these guys risked their lives, and we wanted to bless them. We did this is a picture of our first Vacation Bible School. We actually had a motorhome. We wrapped it up, and we went to a park. All the ones we tried on campus failed. We went to a park, and that started it. And that opened the door. I think we had like 25, 30 kids, and then it started to grow from there. The one on the left, we partnered with a Thrivent agency, and we worked with a group of churches, our community churches, and we started a thing called Crop Drop. And Crop Drop was basically getting food that was left over, gleaned from the fields. And we get about 3 tons of food dropped onto a church property, and we would divide it up and send it out to the areas in need. Another thing we did is that people did backpacks, and the big churches were doing backpacks, and they had Nike shoes in them, and they had fancy backpacks. It was just so. But my kids were in school, and my daughter was struggling in social studies, so I asked, can we get the test to study it? And she goes, no, we're not allowed to bring our test home, so we can learn because there's a final for it. And I was like, well, that's crazy. So I went and met with the teacher. And so I asked the teacher, and she said, well, if I give her the test home, she won't bring it back. I mean, kids don't bring it back, and I don't have record of it. I need to keep record of it. I said, well, we'll sign it. We'll bring it back. She goes, nope, I need to have it. I said, make a photocopy of it. She goes, well, we don't have paper for photocopies. I said, really? So we started doing teacher treats. We bought paper, and the teachers were ecstatic. They thought this is like toilet paper to them. I couldn't believe it. Our schools didn't realize that they were underfunded for the teachers. And teachers use a lot of money out of their own paychecks. If you marry a teacher, you know this. And so we just said, we're going to bless teachers. And teachers can take the supplies and give to kids because they see the needs, not just throw backpacks. And so we did one school. We started doing another school. We got Thriving grants. And so that just started to grow. This is our feeding ministry. We did a feeding ministry. We made Meals on Wheels kind of thing, just made meals. We talked to the fire department, found people that were homebound to bring meals to, and we just served meals on Saturdays. Very simple. But that led to that drug place getting free. We had ladies that were homeless. They were living in an RV in that trailer park, not because they wanted to be there, because they didn't have money to be anywhere else. And that led them into drinking and addictions. And by God's grace, we got several of them free and back connected to their family. We got one guy busted. He had a wooden floor. Most of them had wooden floors. And in his wooden floor was $80,000 of cash and about $100,000 of drugs in a trailer that's worth about 10 grand. And he was getting, this ministry grew more and we got more food. And then I was like, I want to just do meals, and because we started giving more food. And I said, you know what, they're getting a government check, they're getting our food, and they're getting a meal. And all we're doing is getting them more drug money. And so we got out of that. But we got people in rehab and got them out of there. It was a huge, huge endeavor. But it was just a long journey. It was just simply just taking food and knocking on doors and handing out food, and then just start praying with them, and then stories start opening up. It took a while. The other thing, it was like simple. Like this guy, I heard of his wife was really ill, and she got ill, and so, she lived in this trailer, and she could not get out of the trailer. Couldn't walk anymore, and she needed to get to doctor's appointments and stuff like that. So I got a couple guys together. We got some money from different people, and then we got an architect to help us out, and we built a ramp for them. And that ramp is not going to. And that guy, her husband, is a vet who had, what's that, post-traumatic stress syndrome stuff. And like he's on version 5.0, we say. God has moved him. He wouldn't come with bigger groups. He couldn't handle it. He was stressed. He's always on guard. He first came to church, he'd sit in the very back corner, and he would scan the exits because of his training and experiences. He'd have, if he felt it, he would tell his stories. His stories were just horrendous, but amazing to watch this guy grow now because of community. To me, that's a huge win. But if you're a big church, that wouldn't happen. And this guy is, what's amazing, we just did a campaign this winter called Pay Down and Go Down. I'm going to show you later. We're in a 2-story building right now. I can show you. And we want to move to we own the building. We rent out the bottom so we can pay for stuff so we can have the building. But we want to be in the bottom for worship eventually, the next 4 years. So we started a campaign, just Pay Down and Go Down, to just get our mortgage down so we can speed it up, because the renter pays for the mortgage plus. But we want to speed it up so the next 4 years we can move down. And you know who the first person to give was Stephen. Stephen said, I have $3,000 in a hurricane fund. In case a hurricane comes, I don't need $3,000. I'm taking $1,000 out and giving to Pay Down and Go Down. Because that was the challenge, $1,000 per person. And he was the first one. I just moved. And the guy comes to church every week to get water jugs to have fresh water. And yet he's the first one. I could cry. Anyway. That's the beautiful thing when you focus on life change. I told you, this is Egg Drop. Egg Drop, we did at church, and that's the one, we got 17 people. We moved it to a park, and we got 500 people, and now it's over 1,000 every year. And we drop about 5,000 extra. We have food, we have crafts, we have games. We use Thriving grants like crazy to raise the money for it. We got a grant from our district, so we have a portable grill now that we move around for all our events that does the grilling and cooking. People donate the food, and we get volunteers. Before we started, we had volunteers from our church and other churches to help us out. And then it's just our church now does it. And so this is the thing, though. I know I'm just telling you about the money just because it encourage you, hopefully. But there's a guy who doesn't go to our church, but he comes to our events, and he goes to another church, and every event he comes to, he brings a check of $1,000 to say thank you and support it. Because you are sowing seed in this community. My church doesn't do that, so I'm going to give you my extra to you. So they're running through the eggs there. The other ministry that's huge is Layette's. We partnership with the hospital a couple ways. This is actually the one thing they did before I came. They opened up a delivery nurse for babies. And so what we do is we put a baby clothes, blankets, all that kind of first stuff together, layouts, put it in a box for guys or girls, boys or girls, and then we just give them to the hospital. And the hospital determines if they have a family in need, and they give them the box. So now we do we did 400 boxes last. And so this has become a community-wide thing. The other thing we did for the hospital, and actually we just put it on Facebook, and we got huge responses that if people had old wedding dresses, they sewed them for Angel. What's it called? Angel. It's Angel something, I don't know. But basically, if there's a preemie that dies, then they put this dress on that the ladies have taken from wedding dresses and sewn, and give them to them. So I was serving as a chaplain in a hospital, and I just come in for emergencies, and I came into a family that lost their young one, and they had the dress on. And it was amazing to see what that did for that family. We also had we do dialysis. We did gifts of comfort for the dialysis unit. If you know somebody, it's a painful experience. Got games for them to do, coloring, this and stuff, and we made bags of comfort. So when they go for dialysis and sit there for 2 hours, they have something to comfort them. And then we treated them at Christmas with different gifts. Again, there was just a needed group that was unserved, and we built a relationship with the hospital and said, okay, and just discovered that these were needs going around. This is a little bit of picture of Christmas at the beach. Not very good, but I couldn't find other stuff, just the green space. This is kind of what it looks like, a church on the beach. We got a little sound system. We bring a generator down there, and it's kind of people bring their own chairs. We don't bring some chairs, but when I first started, people just brought their own chairs. This is one of the early years when we first started, and we started with about 8 of us there that were the core, and it'd be like 25, and it was going to 50, and we fluctuate even today. Like, we didn't have beach service all January because it was too cold, but we fluctuate anywhere from literally, it could be 20 to 150 at each venue. That's what that was 8 o'clock Easter. We do a sunrise. We do 8 o'clock. We have a 9:20. We have 11, 5 on Easter, and we'll do over 2,500, 3,000 people then. But it's the same people serving all the services. When we start another service, to do another service, it's my mantra is serve one, worship one, serve one. And so our people will worship at one, and then they'll go another one to serve. That's how we multiply. Oops. Yeah. Anyway, that's a little bit closer at what it looks like at Easter. And that was Christmas Eve. We started at Christmas Eve on the beach, and we had 500 there this year. We started, our first Christmas Eve had 50. That's our building. I got time to tell this quick story. So we were in that Mexican market, this older congregation, they just wanted their building. They wanted a church. There was a big drive for that. They had the money for anything, but they had this desire. And so we had a building committee, but the building committee basically was looking for something they could afford and something for their little group that they could be in. And then there were some other people in the building committee that understood we got a mission, and we'll worry about the money later. But let's go after the mission. And those two collided, and it was because in Cultural Riff, I just said, we're done. We spent 6 months doing nothing, literally nothing almost. We had a prayer vigil, and I was doing a youth event then in December. We worked with the community. There was a community youth ministry. We partnered with them and worked with them. And in their youth ministry, they had a lady there that came for this event, and she was introduced to her. She's somebody in the community that really well known, and they wanted to introduce me to her. So I was introduced, and she said, wow, God just told me something. I go, oh, yeah, what's that? She goes, well, God told me that you've been struggling, your church has been in conflict, and you're looking for a building. I don't know her. She doesn't know me. So I'm like, okay, here we go. And she says, but God has an angel that's holding you back. He's now going to remove the angel, and you're going to get your building. I said, Merry Christmas to me. Thank you very much. And then, we just went on. 2 weeks later, I get a phone call. A guy said, hey, that God told me to sell my building to you. I said, really? He said, yeah. And I said, what building? And so he said, this building. This building is literally a block away from where we're renting. Our building committee had said it's terrible, won't work. I said, well, our building committee said it won't work. He said, you need to come over. I said, okay, I'll meet you there. So I met him there, and on the right side of the lower level, that's a storage unit. It always looked empty, and I was thinking maybe he's thinking about that one unit or something. And he goes, no, I want you to buy the whole building. Let's go upstairs. So I go upstairs, and upstairs is super high ceilings, and there's 5 bathrooms, and God, for each bay. And then God just I just had a picture like what church could be like in here. I'm like, oh yeah, this will work. And I said, how much? He said, $2 million. I said, when I get a dream, I'll come back to you. Our offerings were $150,000 that year. We're going to be projected $150,000. So I came back to him and I just said, look, God is not against you making money, but you also have this to be a steward and investment in his kingdom. What's a real number? Go pray about it. He came back 990. And so, went to the congregation. I refused to have voters' meetings on Sundays because I was tired and didn't like it. And I wanted them to have commitment to come because our voter meetings, because we were a small church before I came, when I came, my first voters' meeting, I watched the leadership and the congregation have a voters' meeting, which was a joke because you had 6 people here and you had about 6 people here and a couple others who were not members. And the people out there were telling those people in here what to do. I go, this is backwards. This is not good. These weren't leaders. And so anyway, I wanted to see who would come. They all voted for it. I mean, our council, everybody voted for it. So we had our voters meeting during the week. We had 6 people showed up, and 6 people voted to buy the building. And we bought the building. We did our own fundraising, raised over $300,000, and we moved and built it out. And we went through 4 or 5 build-outs up there. So we just repainted it, but that's kind of what it looks like for the worship inside. But the whole mortgage is paid by the downstairs. And with the economy booming and we just got a new renter, we just increased it to market value. And so that's given us some real extra funding. I told you we had a beach service. This restaurant came in. This used to be a parking lot when we started. This restaurant came in, and the owners came to our beach service. And the owner said, we want a church in our bar. And so we changed the hours of our late service, and we prayed about it, and then we got 6 of us, and we had people that would be willing to do double duty, and then we just started rolling over and started a restaurant in this bar. We started worship in the bar. And so that's the upstairs, and it started off with, again, 20 or so, and now we do 100 a weekend there. Just another picture. So here's the dream for us is to keep being this micro church. Hope Church dreams of leading a movement of multiplying micro churches in untraditional locations to reach unchurched where they live, work, and play. I have invitations to 3 other places. I don't have staff. People see us a blessing in their community. One is in their community. And so our dream is to fill those little nooks and little niches and nooks and crannies. Again, our simple process, I just say this, is that we're about connecting people to Jesus, his family, and his mission. That's the 3 things that we do constantly. So we keep it very simple. I mean, our mission is a simple way to connect to Jesus. We want it for all people to be a simple way to connect to Him. And I think that's the beauty of a microchurch. It can be simple. It can be very neat, very clear, high touch, high transformation. Any questions? I won't do that one. Yes?
Yeah, you talked about a lot of like mindset shifts of yourself and the pastor. You also talked about like the members. How do they make that shift to being more missional? What are like some practical ways that you helped walk through that transition and that shift and helping teach them?
The transition happens a lot because the culture is so defined. So we have that critical mass in our culture that it's caught. Vision's more caught than taught, and so it's caught. You catch on. The other thing is that just as I started sharing stories and did this with you, so our Connect to Your Church dinner we do for people that are coming to our church, we share these stories. I want these stories embedded into their DNA of who we are. We make it very clear who we are and where we're going. And we're very comfortable saying this might not be the church for you, to a church person. Because we have to unchurch people to get on mission. You got to address, their memories, their emotional attachments to things, and how the world has shifted and changed. And it's to be the lead missionary. I didn't say it, but being a lead missionary is that you always have stories. I always have stories almost every weekend just about, because we go out there. So like we go out there on the beach and we start setting up on the beach. People sleep on the beach, which is illegal, but we don't say anything. We just set up. They're sleeping on the beach. I got a 12-pack of beer next to them. We start worship service. They hear music. They sit up. And so I'm watching this. They're sitting up, and he just reaches in and cracks a beer and going, well, it must have been a bad night. And I'm like, wow. And then they keep hearing the music, and they turn around, and they see 80 people behind them. I'm like, uh-oh. And so they get up, and they start walking out. Well, then I started preaching. I was preaching on stewardship. They stopped. They stayed. On stewardship. Wait, it gets better. So there was a pastor's wife there from Columbus, Indiana. Where's my Indiana man? He left there. So she boogied over to them before anybody got to them. She noticed it. She brought them to me. And they're in tears. I was like, what's the story? Well, we started a body shop up in Mobile and Memphis, and we were just burnt out. We said, we just need to go to the beach to get, refreshed and get help. And so we drove down here, and we got a speeding ticket. So we're like, hey, we'll save money. We'll just stay on the beach. And he goes, but we didn't have Jesus. And he reached in his pocket and goes, here's all the cash I have. I want to give it to Jesus. And we prayed. That's the that changes the hearts. When they hear those stories, they see those stories, they want to be part. Don't you want to be part of that story? I want those stories. I want when we're doing the beach service, when drunks come over and they sit down while we're doing service. They're like, is this karaoke? No, it's worship. And they stay. Baptize, and we go baptize them out. The gospel is alive and powerful. I hide it, I think, in a building too much. So that's those stories that are happening, we share. And the fact that we have to go is part of what helps. But what helps keep going is that people receive the blessing in the ministry the way it is, so they want to be part of that and support that. Because they see the difference it's making. So people that are coming from other places are going, wow, this is what I thought church ought to be like touching people, but we never did that. I want to be part of that. And that's why we have people that are of our church that are in other states. We're usually about, was it like I said, 10 states and 3 countries. People watch us on Facebook. I've had people that watch us and they come on vacation, they called me, and I Zoomed them, and then I went and baptized their whole family. I did weddings a lot, destination weddings, but only for a pastor, and that led into another baptism. It led into, I discipled their whole family. So yeah, but the pastor has to share those stories, have a heart for it, or it doesn't bleed over into the congregation. If you want to have the whole church there. But I will say this, move with who's ready to move. Don't wait for everyone. Greg Fink, that was so true. I mean, where they're at, I don't force you to do it, but I say this is what we're going to do. Because this is what we're called to do. And you just do it. And there's some people might never do it, but they'll support it. And your older people and shut-ins, they pray for it. They can't go do it, but we give them prayer. We had people praying for you guys today here. And so we pray over stuff. Praying for the lost is a huge part. I mean, how much time do you pray for the lost? My daughter's part of a ministry out of Colorado. It's called AIMS, and they're there to reach out to unreached people group that have been reached, and they pray every week all together, and they go for different groups, and they raise up missionaries, and they send them, but they start just praying over those different groups and learning about them and studying them and praying and just praying. They don't necessarily go, but they send people and they raise. And that's what we should be doing in the church. You've got to have that heart for the lost. God's got to do that thing for the lost. That's why I talked about the call, because I think it goes back to what's our calling. And you got to empower the pastor for that, right? The church has to say, we empower you to do this. We want you to do this. Some churches don't want to share their time. My church, that group did not, they wanted me for them. And they made it very clear that I was there for them. And I made it very clear I wasn't. Now, I didn't push them off. I just said, I'm not going to hold your hand. And that's what they wanted. And so, yeah, you got to be self-defined enough, willing to say, this is what God's called me to do. I'm going to stand on this. I'm going to resist the temptation to get pulled into this group. So a pastor friend of mine I know, the very missional guy, went to a church, and, he was this missional guy, and he's at the church, and his leadership, hey, let's go play golf. Let's go do this. And they played golf, and they gave him some extra gifts, and they did this. And what they did is they bought him. Because now he couldn't offend them. Now he couldn't stand up to them the same way. So you got to be of gestures. Because I don't want the mission to be hijacked. As the church planner guy said, when you start if you're on mission, God's going to bring affirmation. And it's going to be a truckload of affirmation that's going to happen. So those little gifts are affirmations. Those things, how things happen, people affirmations. And so you just tell stories. You celebrate. What you celebrate gets done. So you're celebrating what you want done in your church. So anything like that's happening, I'm celebrating, I'm cheerleading, I'm sharing as much as possible, because that gets repeated. Like right now, I'm celebrating anything our youth do. I don't care I'm celebrating it all. Because I want our congregation to love youth more. I just a bigger heart for youth. And I think there's a big hurt in our community for youth. And so my heart is just hurting for youth in our communities. I run into these young people that are so lost. And we have churches that are just playing with kids and not discipling them, and it just kills me. But I don't have that bandwidth, so we're praying for somebody to come do that. But I'm preparing by preparing the heart. I tell our church that the community, when my wife was pregnant, what did we do? We made a nursery, right? You prepared. The community's pregnant. Did you prepare for them? Are you ready to embrace them? Are you ready to love them? Are you ready to nurture them? Are you ready to feed them? Are you ready to do all those things? If you're not ready to do them, then God's not going to bring new believers to you. You got to be prepared in the heart. And so we run to the hows and the whats, but it's the being that matters to me more than any of that. We give lip service to it. We'd rather talk about it, fight about it, say it's wrong and all that kind of stuff, and not do it. I mean, it's the worship war stuff. It's all that kind of stuff. It's foolish arguments. Get back to Scripture. Let's go. It's simple. Yes, sir.
You got a post-event follow-up process to stay connected with people?
With what?
Like a post-event follow-up process. Let's say I bring my kids to the Easter egg drop.
Yeah.
You get my name and then stay connected.
We've done it both ways. We've done it both ways. Sometimes we say we don't want to have an agenda, just bless, and sometimes we do a collection. We do have a follow-up. We do a contact. We keep every address. I said, like, we have systems. So under these.
Select my name and then stay in touch with me.
What?
How do you get my name and stay in touch with me?
Oh, you just put a registration booth out there, and you can do a giveaway, but we used to do giveaways once in a while, and we said, this is stupid. We just put the registration out there and ask them to register, and they register, you know.
Do you follow up on those guys?
Yep. Yeah, they get an email, they get an invite. We keep every address, and we mail every address. You know, we are a used car salesman. We'll keep inviting you till you say, I'm dead or I don't want to be there. And we communicate with you. So our mailing list is over 15,000 in our database. That's why we use Breeze, because it's $50. And we just load it all up there. We have categories. I had those circles out there, so we have people in category. They're community versus in, you know, first-time guest, second-time guest. So right now they're just out as a community, and they have a note what event they came to. All that's in the database, and then we'll just keep and put them on our. We'll keep sending that stuff out as long as it's good.
Your little micro system,
Yeah.
they'll have it on Sunday.
Yes. 8, 9:20. So the other one is being set up while I'm finishing up, and I just roll over to 11 o'clock, so I have time for a shower before the other service.
So you're jumping from one to the next.
Yeah. We had 5. So we had congruent services at another beach, and then we had an evening service at a beach too. We just had COVID. We had changes in staff, and so we can't support all that just yet. But we're going to go back. So that's why we're looking to get more staff so we can raise up people to do more of it. And the idea is that we maybe at one time we might plant and do more planting, not just, at some point we'll just plant this microchurch thing and just send them off to go do it themselves. Because some of these, there's a couple of them where you could do a beach and do another venue on land. And two of them, one of them or two of them can sort of support a pastor. So they could build it up to have enough support to do it right. And so at a certain point, we'll just plant as our dream. And
I just took a session called Apostolic Plan.
uh,
You talk to that guy?
no.
You just described his mom.
Well, that's why it's the same model. It's been in Scripture, so it's the same thing. So we're just, I went to Exponential, and, they talk about planting versus multi-site. And so I met with a bunch of their gurus about, like, when do you plant, when do you multi-site? And basically, you plant when you can't have more. The senior pastor can't keep his influence on that site. He needs a plan. Because it's still, regardless of what we think, the leadership's still going to affect everything. It does affect the DNA and the path. And so if you can't have influence and can't be there, can't be present. And so our vision for us is that we'll have lots of micro sites, but because we're not going to have a hub, because I don't want this gravitational force like this is the church. But what enables us is that we can have ministry like for men's and women's and for youth, because we have these small sites that they can come together and have a critical mass for. Yeah, and so that's what's helpful, to have the small approach, but then also to have some, this is just the layer we're building, these other next big things. And so we did a chili cook-off, and we have like 150 people at the chili cook-off, and we did that at a distillery that our members own, so a big warehouse, and then we had just chili cook-off with the community in it. But the main goal of that was to bring all these sites together and let their friends come. So we had about 90 people that are in our church, and then the other people are outside the church. And just to get connected. Because people want to be part of something bigger too. That was nice. So if I didn't have what I had now, I would look for like-minded Lutheran churches that I could just partner with every once in a while to bring people into a bigger setting. So I think it is helpful to have some bigger setting opportunities. You just got to find where you can partner with and leverage other ministries around you. I can't, like my kids went to youth ministry at another place, and then I helped them. But then I met this lady. So, it's just, but that's what you do. You don't have to do everything. And again, it goes like, what's the big picture? I'm about life changing, people connected to Jesus. I'm not about how big it gets for me. Thank you. Anything else? So I say a short prayer. I wanted to pray, and we got distracted. I just say, hey, Father, I just want to thank you for all these people. I'm in their hearts and lean into this time and into you. And I pray, Lord, that you would just pour out your Spirit into them, that you'd use them to be those lights, the voice speaking, the apostles, the ones who hold up the cross to the world, because you it saves. I pray you just surround them with people. You give them affirmation, help affirm them, help encourage them, bring errands around to hold their arms up, and people that will walk with them in this journey as they follow you in this great mission, this great adventure, and that they will have more stories and other stories to share, so much greater. So we thank you, Jesus, in your name, for all the good you're already going to have done and will do. In Jesus' name, amen.